Perfect. Good crowd, real good crowd. Peter's an old neighbor of mine. We used to watch speed racers at his house. It was. We didn't have, for some reason, we didn't have reception at our house, but they had it, yes. And your mom was playing. But Pete's done a lot of research. He was published in the Mayflower Descendant. Is it a quarterly publication?
Biannual.
Biannual. And he is, he'll tell you all about his connection with it, with Mayflower. And Pete's here to discuss West Sutton settlement, the controversies around it, as well as some research methods. And so please welcome Peter. But, excuse me, first I want to say thank you to Chrissy. Great job. And Gary and Judy for letting us be.
All right, courtesy, silence your phones. Silence your phone, please.
Yeah, but thank you very much. This is great. I don't know where we would have fit otherwise. So, but I'll let Pete do the same and have fun.
Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you all for coming. This is quite a crowd. Let's see, where do I want to start? I lived in Sutton for a grand total of 15 years, I think, something like that. My grandmother lived in Sutton her entire life. She used Putnam. Her mother was a Keith, which meant she was pretty much related to everybody in West Sutton. I'm okay with that if you guys are. You guys okay with me talking? All right, go ahead and move forward. Please. So there's a picture of better days. I still have hair, and most of it wasn't gray. That's my grandmother. That's I think was her 80th birthday. So that was quite a while ago. She died in 1999. I was living in California at the time, and when she passed away, I really had this feeling that a lot of family history was gone, but I didn't really know what to do about it. And then, you know, things happened along the way, and my parents got sick, and I got really motivated to do something about it. So that's what brought me here today. So what I want to talk to you guys about today is the process I went through to verify some of her claims about being a Mayflower descendant, which resulted in that article. And along the way, I just learned some things about Sutton, more like West Sutton, that I never knew. And I want to share that with you guys because there's a really interesting story about an area that's going to be known as Collins Farm, which is basically Putnam Hill. So I want to share that with you guys as well. So it's kind of two stories in one. It might take a while to get through it, but I think the payoff will be pretty good at the end. All right, please move forward. All right, there's that barn still stands today. There's not a single iron nail in that barn. It's all wooden pegs.
Wow.
And my first genealogical experience came when I was very young, and I was visiting my grandparents down in Sutton. That's off the Mendon Road. It's right across the street from, I believe, Jim Stevens' house. But that was originally, at one time, Peter Putnam's house, and I believe that was his barn. So that barn on that side of the street went with the house across the street, according to my grandmother at least. And it was probably even, you know, that land changed hands many times. So I asked my grandparents, why is the name on the barn? And my grandmother kind of laughed and asked my grandfather to explain it. And so he said, because that's my name and that's how I spell it. Well, he was one of 7, and his mother and father, Oscar and Lena Michelson, came over from Finland in the late 1800s. And as far as I understand, some of the family pronounce it Michelson, some of the family pronounce it Michelson, but only my branch spells it that way. Now, the reason why they spell it that way, according to my grandmother and grandfather, is back in the day when you were in school in the early 1900s, you had to actually write cursively. Kids don't do that anymore. And you're going to see a lot of cursive writing in some deeds later on in this presentation. But my grandfather, Elmer, could not make a cursive K. And so instead of allowing the teacher to take points off his papers, he said, that's the way I spell my name. So for the rest of his life, he spelled his name that way. He put it on the barn, and our entire branch of the family spelled it this way, and nobody wants to change it back. So that's kind of where that's at. Please move forward. I put these in today at the last minute. This is my grandfather's brother. He actually died in World War II. And it occurred to me that this memorabilia and other things were in the house. And whenever someone came to visit, my grandparents would show it. And I didn't realize why this was in the house until it occurred to me, well, wait a minute, after Oscar died, Lena moved to Sutton from Worcester to be with her oldest son, and all of the memorabilia was hers. So that's actually her stuff that was in my grandparents' house, and they were very proud of this. In fact, so I just wanted to show it. One's a Purple Heart, one's a letter from Franklin Roosevelt. I'm sure that's a rubber stamp. It's probably but if you probably can't see it. You definitely can't see the back, but the name is spelled with a K. I promise you it is.
That's World War II, correct?
World War II, right. So the other part of that story is I do a lot of flying for work, and I always look to find a book. And I like to hold a book, you know, not always reading from the computer. This is a book called Monuments Men. And this book talks about how they recovered all of the artwork and sculptures that were stolen by the Nazis from France mostly. And there's another, I think there's a follow-on book about getting the artwork back to Italy. So that was kind of intrigued me to look into Carl and his, he's actually buried in Anzio. And I actually been to Rome, and I did not go to the cemetery, and I feel pretty bad about that. But as my dad was getting ill, he was very interested in this, so I started doing research on this, which led to doing more research about my grandmother's side of the family. Okay. So, she was a Putnam. So what was I looking for? I was looking for two things. I was looking for a general in the Revolutionary War, and I was looking for a Mayflower connection. So this is Rufus Putnam. This is his portrait. The bullet points there, you can read them, are from an article written by George Frisbee Kapoor. And if you don't have that in your records, you should probably get a copy of that. It's pretty good. So if you guys want a copy of that, please ask. We'll have to give it to you. So there's two things I want to mention in this list. The first one is the engineering that drove the British away from Boston. What that means is, if you've ever heard of Evacuation Day, that was the day that the British decided to leave Boston after about a one-year siege. And they built a fort on Dorchester Heights. It was his design. He kind of prefabbed it, built it kind of overnight. Henry Knox brought all the cannons down from Fort Ticonderoga. They put the whole thing together, and in the morning the British woke up and there was a big fort there. And so they had two choices. We're either going to go take the fort down, or we're going to leave because there's now cannons pointed at them. And they got beat up so bad at Bunker Hill, they didn't want to do that again. And that's why they left. And that's called Evacuation Day. And he was very critical of that. Now, the guys in Southie have taken that day over, and they now celebrate St. Patrick's Day on that day. But the reason why everybody has a day off in Boston is because of that. Now, the last bullet is, it says the conclusion of slavery from the Northwest Territory. The Northwest Territory would be Ohio Valley. And so after the war, he organized a bunch of people to go to the Ohio Valley. He was very instrumental in making sure it remained slave-free. Now what that did is it prevented, when the Civil War finally started, all of those states were northern states, and it really tilted the balance of the war into the north.
Excuse me. The first bullet, what do you mean by the engineering that the British Army was?
So he designed a fort that could be prefabbed and then moved overnight and built on the top of Dorchester Heights.
Sorry, now I understand.
Very good. Ask as many questions as you want, people, please. I have no problem at all.
I
Yes?
assume that was log revettes and that sort of thing?
Yes, exactly. It was from a book that he borrowed from General George Meade. And in the liner notes for this, not the liner notes, presenter's notes for this presentation, I actually reference it. And I'm going to make this presentation available to Chrissy. And you guys, as far as I'm concerned, you guys are all welcome to it. Good question. Okay. Does anyone know, well, I mean, how do I want to start this? What this is the 200th celebration of Sutton. And what they're doing is they're dedicating the Rufus Putnam Memorial. Yeah, I missed that one too. And this was a big deal. About 3,000 people showed up for this, plus all the carriages and stuff. And I borrowed this from Chris Sinicola's book. It's kind of a cool picture. I'm going to ask a question. I need some audience participation. How many people know where the Rufus Putnam Memorial is in Sutton?
Is that the Freeland Triangle?
No, shh. Leave your hands up, please, leave your hands up. Okay, very good. A lot of people, excellent. No, please leave your hands up. All right, now, of the people who have their hands up, the only people I want to put their hands down are the people who are related to the Putnams. All right, how about the people who are related to the Keys? All right, so about half. I wasn't sure how big the crowd was going to be. I'm really glad you guys know where this is. It's kind of hidden in the trees now. Notice there's not a single tree in this picture. And you know, one thing I forgot to mention for the last slide is there's a book coming out by Pulitzer Prize-winning author David McCullough next year called The Pioneers. And Rufus Putnam will actually be one of the heroes in that book. So Sutton and Rutland will have a great opportunity to showcase themselves because there are lots of Rufus Putnam memorabilia in both towns. This is what the inscription is on that plaque, and it kind of goes through the same things we were just talking about. I thought I'd leave that in there so that people want to review this on their own and see it. But it's actually worth looking at and checking out. This is a piece of art done by John Trumbull, who was known as a revolutionary artist. He did a lot of paintings like this. This one happens to be a very large version of this one happens to be the Capitol building, the Rotunda. So if you actually visit Washington, D.C., and you take a tour of the Capitol building, you go into the Rotunda, and that will be on the north-facing wall, and it's like 20 by 25 feet in size, and it's huge. Rufus Putnam is actually in this picture.
Third from the right.
Go ahead.
What was the year of that painting?
So Rufus Putnam is actually this person right here. So I had the opportunity to go to DC and see that, and I'd never noticed it before, so that was great. So I wanted to share that with everybody here. Good. This is another general. I found two generals in the Putnam family. This is Israel Putnam. This guy is a folk hero. There are 8 states in the Union with Putnam counties named after this guy. This guy was, he made dashing escapes from the British. He had all kinds of experiences in the French and Indian War. But the first time I ever heard about him was probably 3rd or 4th grade. They started talking about the Battle of Bunker Hill. And the famous thing from Bunker Hill is, don't shoot till you see the whites of his eyes, right? And then the second part is, then shoot low. That was attributed to Rufus Putnam. Israel Putnam. Now, if you want to have some fun, go up on the internet and say, he didn't say that. Or say, General Warren said that, right? Because there's a big war between people who are trying to figure out who actually said that. But anyways, he is definitely a folk hero. 8 counties with the Putnam name, and even Putnam, Connecticut is named after him. This is same artist, John Trumbull, Battle of Bunker Hill, and Israel Putnam is over here on the left. Okay. This particular painting is, there's a lot going on in here. But the battle itself was really the important thing. Thank you. This are some monuments down in Connecticut. This is his grave, actually. And this is a monument from Greenwich, Connecticut. He had made some escape from the British, riding his horse downhill and stuff. So he's definitely very well known.
Isn't that one in Brooklyn, Connecticut?
This is in Brooklyn, Connecticut. He lived in Brooklyn. Putnam named the town after him, but he didn't live in Putnam. Good question. Oh, you did?
I did, so that's why I recognize it.
Excellent. All right. So the Putnams were extremely well documented. It was easy to find information about the Putnams. It wasn't so easy to find information about my grandmother's branch of the Putnams, but it was easy to find information about the Putnams. And I wondered, because we all just assumed, did the Putnams really come over on the Mayflower? And the answer is no. They came over in 1634, long after the Mayflower was here. They came over through Salem, Massachusetts. And it turns out that my particular branch of the Putnams got themselves involved in land disputes. They wanted to start their own town, they weren't allowed to. It was basically all about money, power, self-determination. And it turned into what we all know as the Salem witch trials. So it was pretty disappointing finding out that they didn't go over the Mayflower. They were actually involved in witch trials. But I didn't give up, and I decided to keep looking. And can you go back?
Yep, sorry.
Yes, thank you. So it turns out my grandmother was right. There is a connection to the Mayflower, to her family tree. And if I recall, what she said was, my family tree goes back to the Mayflower. She never said the Putnams came over on the Mayflower. But all the kids just assumed she meant the Putnams. All right, so I know the people in the back certainly can't read this, but what I ended up doing was finding out that there were some relatives from Douglas that were in the family tree. And looking at the land records from Douglas, I was able to figure out who married whom and get it all the way back to the Mayflower. So let's move forward from there. If you're going to go on a quest to find something like some sort of lineage society like the Mayflower or the Daughters of the American Revolution, you need vital records. What are vital records? Vital records are birth, marriage, and death certificates, typically from the town clerk. You're trying to determine who the parents of this person are. That's the important thing. Now, if you can't find vital records, you can also use a will or a probate record, family Bible, family letter. Those can also satisfy the criteria. So how do you get all the way back to the Mayflower? Well, you have to do two things. You have to use the 5 most recent generations in great detail, and the first 5 generations in great detail, and then everything in between. So how do you get the first 5 generations? Well, they actually published the first 5 generations. Right here is what is known as the Silver Book. And in this there's like, I don't know, maybe 20 different versions of this book for different people. And the first 5 generations for all the different Mayflower descent passengers that are known have been documented. So if you can get to this and get the first 5 generations, you're just going to fill in the gap. So I thought I had it figured out. And I submitted my application, and they said, no thanks, you don't qualify. The way I was able to figure this out is from the DAR records. So Louise is here, and she can verify this. You get a copy of this record, you go to Pigeon Hill Cemetery, and every single person on that piece of paper is buried in Pigeon Hill Cemetery. My grandmother told me that that was the family cemetery. We would visit West Sutton Cemetery, we would visit Pigeon Hill Cemetery, but the one she called the family cemetery was Pigeon Hill. I didn't realize that this is what she meant. But if you carefully read this, you will see there's Elijah Brown Putnam, and And Mary Edna Putnam Keith was her daughter. And down here, there's Nathaniel Sibley, married to a Mary Brown. And somehow I was able to figure out that Elijah Brown was her father. And he was from Douglas. And then that enabled me to fill in the next 5 generations. So the DAR does a great job, and thank you very much. But my problem was twofold. The first problem I had was the birth certificate for ABIA Leonard is incomplete. Notice, it says that she's from New Sherborne. She was baptized in September 1739, but they don't give the father's first name. He's a Leonard, but which Leonard? That's the problem. The second problem I had is the New England Genealogical and Historical Society published a book with someone from Southbridge that documented all of the Leonards from Solomon Leonard all the way down, and her name wasn't in there. So the Mayflower, the General Society of Mayflower Descendants said, sorry, you don't qualify. So I like solving puzzles, and I really, really like telling people that they're wrong. They tell me I'm wrong. And now I was completely motivated. Here's a marriage certificate for ABIA Leonard, and it says very clearly that she married Nathaniel Brown in Douglas, 1757. No parents. That was my problem. The other thing I wanted to mention is New Sherborne is actually Douglas. The people from Sherborne lost a lot of land and residence to Framingham when Framingham became a town. And so in compensation, the Massachusetts Bay Colony gave them land in Nipmuc country, which became Douglas. But it was called New Sherborne until 1746, 1747. Okay, so how do I tell the Mayflower Society and everyone else that's telling me I'm wrong that they're wrong? I'm going to go look at the deeds, and maybe I can prove that that somehow she was related. So that's this next part of the presentation talks about how you use land records and what information you can get from it. So how do you find the land records? You can get them online, or you can go to the Registry of Deeds and list. Thank you. So I can tell you I've never been to the probate court to get them in person. I do all this online. But I do go to the libraries quite a bit. I do interact with people. This one I can get online for Worcester County. For other counties, it's a little bit more difficult. If you're looking for information about people from other states, you have to go to the town hall and certainly in Connecticut and Vermont. I definitely have to do that. Go ahead. All right. MassLandRecords.com is the place to go if you want to do it online. For the other counties, I would recommend using FamilySearch.org, but you need to figure out what book and page, and then once you've got that figured out, you can go get the record. What kind of information can you find in the deeds? You can find the name of the person, what their title was, which is kind of interesting. Everybody gets a title, whether you're a farmer or a physician or anything in between, you get a title. So that gives you some idea of what the status of this person was. The grantor would be the person who sold it, the grantee is the person who bought it. All of this information is right at the top of the document. This is kind of the interesting bit, and this will show up later in the presentation. What are the boundaries of the property? It's called beats and bounds. And a lot of times they will tell you who the neighbors are on each east, west, north, and south bound, which is extremely helpful. And the last bit of information that you get are the dates the deed was written and the date is recorded. They're not always the same date. It could be many years between when it was written and when it's recorded. And that will also come up later in the presentation. And the last part I really like a lot is witnesses. Someone has to witness this as being a proper document. And you can actually use that information as well. And I actually do use that information to prove when John Leonard dies. I found a deed that shows he witnessed the deed in January of 1779, and then in April of 1779, his land is then referred to as John Leonard, lately deceased. Somewhere in that window of time, he died. None of those other two, the Mayflower Society or the New England Genealogical and Historical Society, knew that. So no one knew where he died. Why do you want to know where he died? When and where? Because if you die and you have a will, you know which county to look in. If you don't have a will and you have an estate, it goes into probate. So if you know when he died, when someone dies, you can look that stuff up. So it's really important. So that's new information that was never known before. All right, I am certain most people can't read this, and that's sort of the point. It's hard to read cursive, and it's really hard to read cursive from the back of the room. But what this presentation shows you is where you can find the information in the deed. Go ahead. So if there's some, step through it, please. Okay. So this tells you who the grantor and grantees are and where they live and where they're from, because they're going to be moving to town, right? And here it tells you the title. He's a yeoman. What's a yeoman? A yeoman is a farmer with lots of land. But they work the land themselves. They don't have any help. So there's three different categories of farm: husbandman, yeoman, and gentleman. So if you're a husbandman, you own land, but not a lot of it. Okay, go ahead. So this is for Job Knapp of Douglas, who the DAR is their chapter named after. So this is why I put this together, because I gave this talk down there last year. He's also a yeoman. Go ahead. And the consideration for this was £4, I think, is what that said. It was just a small piece of land. Just happened to be a good deed for this presentation. All right. So the meets and bounds. What are the boundaries of the land? Now they're not going to give it to you in feet. They're going to give you the information in poles, perch, or rods. Thank you. So that's what you're going to see there, which are 16.5 feet, basically. So this is in Douglas. Land, I can't even take 5 acres. That's how much land there is. 5 acres. Right, very good. And this meets and bounds a black oak tree in the corner of John Brown's land. Really, really accurate information. Right?
A heap of stones.
Right, behind a heap of stones, right, exactly. And then 22 rods, turning, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Very good. And then I think the last bit is telling you, okay, this is when it's executed, right? Go ahead. But this is when it's recorded. 2 different dates. There can be 2 different dates. So you can use, so what would you use this for? You want to know where your ancestors lived? You might do something like this. If you want to know who their neighbors were, you might do something like this. And that will give you a much better appreciation for what kind of people they chose to live next to. Because they really did choose to live wherever they wanted, wherever they could buy land. Okay, go ahead. Right. So this is just sort of summarizes the husbandman, yeoman, and gentleman. And most of that, back in this time frame, most people would have owned land, so you should be able to find information about them. And they may have done transactions to their own children or relatives or whatever. Okay, so I used something called Deed Mapper to make a map of basically the entire town of Douglas to figure out where John Leonard lived. And it was kind of a fun job, and I like doing it. And but you have to have a reference point. Now, if you notice, there's a really strange notch right here in Oxford near Sutton and Douglas. And if I can find a deed that referenced that location, I can make a map with the software. Good. This is the John Leonard deed from 1744. Does anyone want to try to read that? It's a good start. I thought I'd never finish when I saw this the first time. This is a transcription of that deed, and I highlighted and put in bold some of the important information. You see that he's from New Sherborne, which I later discovered meant Douglas. You see that he's a tanner, so he was making leather. And he had a partner, his name was Brian Curtis, who was a husbandman. It was near Manchog Pond. Excellent. You know where that is. And it bounds east on the pond and north on Richard Waters' farm. Fantastic. I know where that is too. And it goes on and on about all the different bounds. And eventually in red here, what it says is Manchog Farm. What the hell is Manchog Farm? Never heard of that, right? So I decided to find out. Manchog Farm, well, this is a map of John Leonard's property estimation. And my grandmother's house would have been right about here, in the Collins farm. This 2,000-acre block here is Manchog Farm. And that is well documented in the Oxford town history and other records that I'll show you.
Now, back to that map. What was that map from right there?
That map there, I believe, that's a great question. I had forgotten what that was from. My brother helped me figure it out.
Okay.
I believe that's from the GIS map on the town website.
As a layout of plot.
And I just zoomed out far enough that you don't see any plots, you just see kind of stuff. But I wanted to make sure I included this part over here so I could put Douglas in.
So Peter,
Yes.
you got that off the current assessor's website on the GIS today. Someone could log in and get that, and then you overlaid Manchog Farm, Collins Farm yourself.
Yeah, using the deed map software. Right. So the trick is to get the right scale, find a straight line somewhere, and make sure that the deed, the beats and bounds that you're putting in match the scale. That's sort of the idea. So anyone can do this, but you need a reference point. Okay, go ahead. So, I'm sorry. Back up, please. Okay, so that wasn't enough information to prove that ABIA was John's daughter. So then I researched the entire Brown family, looking for a record somewhere that said that, ABIA was married to, Nathaniel Brown and was John Leonard's daughter, or hopefully the probate records for John Leonard would show that he was her daughter. No probate records, no will. So I just found every scrap of information I could about the Brown family and realized that there's lots of Browns, lots of similar names, lots of bad information. And the only chance I had was to write an article and hope that the Mayflower Society would accept it. So I didn't like hoping. It's not a great strategy. So I looked on the Mayflower's website, and they actually have professional genealogists that you can work with. So I contacted one. She lives in Shrewsbury. She's on the board of directors for the General Society of Mayflower Science. If she agrees with me, then I think I'm in a good spot. So I actually worked with her for a while. And she said, oh yeah, absolutely, 100%, no problem.
Question.
Yes.
What is Manchog Farm?
I would love to do an entire presentation
Oh, you are.
on Manchog. But thank you for asking. So what did I do? So I told the Mayflower Society I'm going to publish this paper. And they said, because I asked the people that published the Mayflower Descendant, are you interested in this paper? They said, yes. So then they said, okay, great. We'll wait till it's published before you can become a member, which took 2 years. And so it was just a really frustrating experience. Please move forward. I came across this letter, which was in Boston at the New England Genealogical and Historical Society, and it outlines everything in my paper, which was unbelievable. And so what I highlighted for you is that Sarah Brown married Beriah Curtis. You guys remember the name Beriah Curtis? Was alive?
Yeah.
Right. She was 20 years older than Nathaniel Brown, older sister. There were 12 kids in the family. So I'm sure he went over there in the summer to hang out with his aunts and maybe met the neighbors. And eventually got married. Something like that happened. And it says very clearly, my father Nathaniel married Abby Leonard, daughter of John Leonard, who married Naomi Curtis. That's what I was looking for. I actually found what I was looking for. And I wasn't even looking for it when I found this, which is kind of crazy. So this record was written in 1844 by Abby Leonard Brown's oldest son, John. The guy lived to be 97. He was 86 when he wrote it to his grandson. His grandson wanted to know where are we from. If you actually read through there's another whole page to this, which I didn't provide here. But if you read through it, you find out that they had absolutely no idea who John Leonard was. They thought they were American. They were far more interested in the other side of the family, who they thought were Irish, which I guarantee you is not true. Now, if you read the history of Douglas, the Browns are mentioned. There's two Brown families, though. It's not really clear, but there are actually two Brown families. And I believe this John Brown here would be the yellow-headed John Brown that you read in the history of Douglas. All right.
After I war. If you listen, a lot of them dying in the after war.
Yeah, so
Which is
you're
unusual for so many in one family to die in that war.
right, exactly. So that's a great point. So I didn't show this deed, but there's a deed from Dudley. Nathaniel Brown, Abby's husband, was the executor of his father's estate. The two younger brothers were given lands, but they died. So that land, by the will of the father, went to Nathaniel, his son. And so you see a deed with the 9 surviving, or 10 surviving siblings, transferring the land to Nathaniel. And in one of those, Abby is a witness, and in one of those, she's actually a co-executive. I didn't show you that, but that's in the interest of time. The other thing that's in here is it talks about Elijah Brown and Mary Morse. That would have been Mary Brown's parents. They're actually buried in Paxton. They moved around. They lived in Douglas and Sutton for a while, then Grafton, then Westboro, and eventually moved to Paxton. So if you read the history of Paxton, they say, oh yeah, they ran a tavern in Paxton, and they came from Westboro, which is true, but then the whole story is they actually started in Illinois, or Thompson, Connecticut.
So Peter, is that from the manuscript collection?
Yes, that is from the manuscript collection. So I had to actually go there to get a copy of it. So I was allowed to make a photocopy of it, and I was able to give that in PDF form to the Mayflower Society.
Found it online, American Ancestors.org.
I did. On AmericanAncestors.org is where I found this, and what I haven't told you guys is Nathaniel and Abby and their entire family, except for Elijah, moved to Williston, Vermont in about 1802 or so. So I did a search on their website for Brown, Vermont, and they had this letter. I couldn't believe it. It was amazing. So now I am actually a Mayflower descendant. Half the Putnams are as well. And that's kind of, I think, over here. Okay, go ahead. Right. So, finding Manshark Farm made me wonder, what is Manshark Farm and Collins Farm and all of those different things? So, my idea of West Sutton, or Sutton is really West Sutton. That's where I spent most of my time when I lived here. To find out that maybe it really wasn't part of Sutton, and I was intrigued by that. So I did some research, and it started with the history of Oxford. It's quite good. And what I found out is there are praying towns all over Massachusetts early in the late 1600s. Okay. So here they all are. This is a great map. We could just leave this map up and talk about this for half an hour and not show you anything else. But I got about probably 25 more slides to do. All right, so Maiden was the main Indian praying village. There was actually a church there. There's only one other village that ever had a church. That's Hassamanessa, or Hassamanessa, Grafton. Okay. This road is most certainly the Connecticut path. Okay. It has 2 branches. All right. Now I took some stuff off the map, and I wanted you to try to guess where praying village of Manchog.
Right above the U.
The U of Sutton. Stitched together? Yes, you're right. There's a little plus sign there. Go ahead, Chrissy.
Which U?
Yes, that's where Manchog is. Okay, excellent. It's not here in Manchog. It's actually in West Sutton. Right here, right where. This is Boston Road. This is probably Mendon Road. So where those two roads would have met is where the praying village of Manchog would have been. Now, on your entering Sutton sign, which was a really big deal when I was a young kid coming down, for the weekends. We'd all get excited when we were driving on Single Fair Road and entering Sutton, right? It says 1704. Why would it take 1704 to start Sutton when Oxford and Woodstock started in 1683? Didn't people just move west? So now the story gets really intriguing, right? So solving that puzzle and understanding that helped me understand a lot about the town of Sutton and the village of Manchog. Okay, go ahead, Christine. There were two men, very powerful men. Both of them, I think, served as governor at one point. One is Joseph Dudley, the other is William Stoughton. When you're powerful enough that towns are named after you, you're a big deal. And these guys served in the general court. And they wanted to start their own town. So what did they do? The first thing they did is they asked the Massachusetts Bay Colony, can we go by the Indian lands after the wars, after the King Philip's War? What's worth buying? So on behalf of the colony, they did that. They bought essentially from Springfield, the Springfield Road, which I would consider Route 9, west of the Blackstone River, all the way down to the state line for the province of the Massachusetts Bay, that's right, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. So that's a big chunk of land. They also bought another section of land, I believe, in Hardwick. The grand total that they paid for this was 50 pounds and a coat to the Indians, okay, for doing this. But what they wanted to do is they wanted to start Oxford. Okay, so go ahead. So they had a bunch of powerful people that they were allied with. Dudley and Stoughton are in there. Blackwell was a member of Parliament. Cox was a physician. Thompson was the president of something called the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel. He was basically investing, I would say, government proceeds in land speculation, taking the proceeds of that and financing what was going on with the Indian villages. They had pastors, so they needed obviously lots of them. They had a Bible they printed in Algonquin, so this guy was actually financing all that. He was doing real estate transactions. Each one of these blocks of land is 6,000 acres. And then this is what we consider Oxford Village, or Oxford downtown. Oxford was supposed to be the center of central Massachusetts. Didn't quite work out that way. So for the pains of doing all of this work, Dudley and Stoughton were each granted a grand total of 1,000 acres anywhere they wanted, and they picked right here in the corner of Oxford, so here, which is Manchog Park. We know exactly where it is. We can still see it on a map today. Now, the reason why it actually jogs down like this is when they made the original plot, they were short a little bit. So you can't cheat these guys. They didn't cheat the Indians. So they had to extend this down. I don't remember the exact distance, a little bit, so they got their full complement of land. And now we can find this on a map even till today. All right, so now you can see it pretty clearly. That is the Manchog Farm. So the Dudley land would be to the west, the Stoughton land to the east, and there were three other farms next to it: Hutchins Farm, Addison Farm, and Collins Farm. Hutchinson and Addison were also people on the general court, and maybe some of you know this, maybe you don't, but early on, Massachusetts surveyed the land for the Connecticut border, and they were about 7 miles too far south. So Woodstock, Connecticut was actually New Roxbury originally, and it was part of Massachusetts. So these two guys went down to Connecticut, and they negotiated a settlement. And so for their pains and sufferings for doing that out in the wilderness, they were each granted 500 acres of land adjacent to the Manchar Farm. Collins was a reverend. He went to Harvard, went back to London, and at the time, Massachusetts didn't have anyone in Parliament speaking on their behalf. So he did that as a favor. And so in consideration for doing that, they gave him 500 acres of land. The story of Collins Farm is very interesting. All right, let's move on to the next slide. So here's Sutton in 2018. Now this is a Google map. So they're actually not cutting through the lakes. They're kind of showing you the boundaries of the lake. But that's what it looks like today. All right, let's move forward. Here's what it says on the Common. This was put up in 2004. The first line is the one that I'm interested in. I'll read that to you guys for the people in the back here. In 1679, 8 miles of land was transferred by the Native American Wampus to the English owners. How many people think that's actually true? It's the spirit of what they're saying is true. But the first mistake that they have is 8 square miles, not 8 miles. Okay, it's a really big chunk of land. The mistake they have is that Wampus could not have transferred land because it was Indian land, and the Indian community had to transfer the land. So he did try to transfer the land in 1679, but it took the guy that got the land, Edward Pratt, until 1704 to actually take hold of it. All right, please move forward. All right, that is what Sutton originally looked like. That is the compromise that the Indians came up with this Edward Pratt, and this is what it kind of might have looked like. Half Ananisco is basically Grafton. It's a 2 mile square around, it's a 4 mile square. The Blackstone River would have been about here, and most of it would have been east of the Blackstone. That is the land that they're talking about, I think, in that monument. So why couldn't Wampus give the land to Edward Pratt? Because he was an Indian, and that's Indian land. Okay, that's number one. So who was Wampus? Wampus was the son of possibly a sachem, and his name was Old Wampus, and he was very much interested in these praying towns and the gospel. And he attended something in Onanton, which is basically Newton, where they said you should bring your children and let them live, with the English, so they could know God. So he did. So Wampus actually lived at, with the English family. He grew up English. So the English transfer of land is totally different than the Indian transfer of land. He had no problem writing deeds and signing land with people. The Indians wouldn't ratify it, and the general court didn't want anything to do with it. And they owned all the land west of the Blackstone anyways. So basically said, okay, Edward Pratt, if you can prove that you own that land, we'll grant it to you. Produce some documents. Couldn't do it. So Wampus actually went back. He went to England twice. Once at the start of King Philip's War, he got in trouble at a church in Cambridge, got thrown in jail, busted out of jail, jumped on a ship, and served on a ship, went to London. Found himself in jail there, got in trouble with debt, wrote a bunch of deeds on land that maybe he didn't really own, got the king to say, don't treat this guy badly, he's a landowner in the colonies, and he got some relief. Came back, found out his wife was dead. His wife is actually from the Fairfield, Connecticut area, the daughter of LEONARD, who was a sachem. So chances are the Mohegan sachem wouldn't be allowing his daughter to marry anything else but the son of a sachem. Joanne was probably 60. She had passed away. He went to Fairfield to get her land, and they locked him up in jail in Fairfield because he must have caused a scene down there. Finally got out of there, went back to London, got another letter from the king saying, hey, don't treat this guy badly, but he died. And when he died, he left the land to Edward Pratt in 1679. So that's what they're referring to in that monument in the column. This is what Sutton finally looks like. Now, this was platted in 1715, and then on your entering Sutton signs in 1704. What was the agreement that was made in 1704 that finally decided to allow the guy to get his land? What he did was he brought the governor's son onto the investment group that was going to start the town. And miraculously, all the barriers to getting clear title to his land were removed, and Sutton was founded. Now, this is not a great picture. Hopefully you can see some of the boundaries. And what we're interested in is what's going on over here. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. There is an overlay of a modern-day map of Sutton with the meets and bounds that I've figured out from that map. And I know exactly where Manchar Farm is. Go ahead. And I can line that up. So as long as my scale is right, this should be about right. I don't quite have this measurement right. But I think this is pretty close to what they were talking about. And again, I lived over here. This is what I think of Sutton. It's not even part of Sutton. So I kept doing more research, and I did something for Martin Bowden one time, giving him a record of everyone who owned the Edward Putnam house, which is where he lives, right? And one of the ancestors started talking about Collins Farm and the Sibley Cemetery. Pigeon Hill was originally called Sibley Cemetery. Collins Farm is this area down here. So it's pretty simple, right? No big deal. Except the history of Sutton, Volume 1, over here, says that Edward Putnam came to Sutton in 1737 and bought 500 acres of land. No, he didn't. That's Collins Farm. What's going on, right? The real story behind all of that is that Collins dies in 1683. His son petitions the general court for the land. So in 1707, they said, yeah, we never gave him the land. And they put it on the map like this. Seems reasonable, except the son's in London. There are other people. There are 5 different branches of the Collins family living in the colonies. Lots of them are named John Collins. People tried to sell this as their own 2 different times. One guy was from Guilford, Connecticut, and he sold it to a guy named Joshua Underwood, who was from Holliston, which was part of Sherburne, so he had land down in New Sherburne. He knew all about it, whether that land was valuable or not. He was happy to buy it. He died. They registered that land in Middlesex County, but they never did. They were never able to do anything with it. I'm not sure what happened there, but they weren't able to sell it or split it up. Another John Collins claims the land, sold it to his, actually a guy named Ebenezer Collins sold it to a guy named Joseph Berry, and Berry started breaking up in pieces. Joseph Collins was the son, basically he fought in the French, the King Philip's War, and they were making a claim that this was land promised him for fighting in the war. But that's obviously not what happened. But this went on for quite some time, 1731 or so, up until about 1754, when Francis Collins, who actually owned the land in London, passed away and went bankrupt. And there was a bankruptcy here. And this guy, it took quite some time to go through, but eventually they came looking for their land. And so what happened with Francis Collins was he was a merchant. He actually sold timber to the Royal Navy, masts, right? Very successful guy. He decided to expand his business, And now he was going to places in Northern Europe, you know, to get things that he couldn't get in England that helps with shipbuilding. The problem was King Gustav from Sweden was at war with Russia, where his ships were, and he commandeered the ships, took everything, and put the guy in bankruptcy. So nobody ever came looking for the land until 1753, 1754. Someone came back over from London and said, this was in bankruptcy court, I now own it, what are you doing on my property? The Putnams had to rebuy, all the people that lived in there had to rebuy the property. Only three people that lived there actually rebought it. Two of them, Isaac Nichols and Jonathan Nichols, and Edward Putnam. They bought all 500 acres, they paid more than what they originally paid for, and then they broke it up and sold it. So this thing, they had to buy their land twice. That's unbelievable. All right, so here's a picture of the original plat of Addington Farm. I like to include that because you can see Mendon Road here clearly, and the road to Hassanamisco or Boston Road, which is essentially the Connecticut Path. There's the Collins Farm. These are maps that you can get at the State Archives in near UMass Boston.
Hey,
Yes.
on all these maps, you're seeing these dotted lines here and yon. Why are they dotted and not solid like that? Not that wedge between those two pieces of land.
Great question. So the solid line would be the plot of land that he's actually describing. A plan of 500 acres, Manchog Farm, blah, 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 right? That's what he's describing. The dashed lines out here are already known areas, so this can't encroach on this land, right? And this dashed line here, I have a theory what that's for. If you want to do some geometry, you want straight lines, right? So they made a square out of this, and a triangle out of that, and figure out the area of this and the area of that, and you know how much land it was.
Because you get the dotted line, you know.
Right. So if you want, we can do some geometry later.
No,
That's some theory. No? All right. All right, very good. So this is the actual grant in the State Archives, and on the back of that map, you would actually see this written, just like you see it here. Okay, so how'd they get away with this? The selling of the land they didn't really own. That, I believe, was a forged deed. Okay, so you see that they have John Collins giving it to Joseph Collins. Ebenezer Collins is Joseph Collins' son. He's the executor of the estate. And in the will it says, you know, any land that's not mentioned is yours. He's claiming that's his land.
And he's out of Essex.
He's out of Essex.
And so you got people in Middlesex saying it's theirs. You have people, because you weren't registered in Worcester yet. You were registered in either Suffolk, Essex, or Middlesex.
And Worcester didn't start until 1731. And so Worcester starts in 1731, and they bring up a guy named John Chandler from Woodstock to run it. That's the son of John Chandler who made those original maps, right? Go to the next slide, please. Here is where it says when it was executed, written 1739. When was it recorded? 1676. There's no way that's real. Okay? Not that they couldn't have been a long length of time, but John Collins never came back from London. This didn't happen. So John Chandler registered it, knowing he had to know, because his father made the plat. Right? So how does the story end? Well, the Putnams rebuy their land, break it to pieces, and sell it off and get their money back. The Revolutionary War starts. John Chandler, his son was a Tory. He lost everything. So karma. Yeah. Go ahead. All right, so last couple slides. In the history of Sutton, Volume 1, it says there were 7 Putnams that came to Sutton. It doesn't say who they are, but it says they came to Sutton. I figured out who they were and where they lived. This is essentially Mendon Road here. This is Putnam Hill Road here. They all came to a part of town that wasn't really a part of town. Isaac, Jephthah, Cornelius, Elijah Putnam was Rufus Putnam's father. The Rufus Putnam Memorial is right there on Boston Road. This is Edward Putnam's place here. That gets us to 5. There's a Terrence Putnam that lived out here on the town farm area. And then there was another Putnam, whose name I forget, actually was up in this area, which became Milton. Sorry, this area up here, which became Milton. So, if anyone cares, we actually know who they were and where they lived, which is kind of interesting. All right. I didn't think the talk would go this long, so I thought I'd throw this in there. How did Sutton actually get its name? Now, this, again, the history of Sutton says, well, Wampus was on a boat and they named it after the doctor because he was sick. Didn't happen. He did see a doctor when he was in London. The doctor's name was Owen. It was not Sutton. Okay. In the History of Sutton, Volume 2, this theory is debunked. And a lot of what I'm telling you about came from this as well. And this is already well written by J. Fred Humes, who, by the way, his mother married, his father married Sarah Putnam, Peter Putnam's daughter, so he lived right across the street from my grandmother's house. The other theory is there's a Dudley family connection. So the township of Sutton was created, in honoring the family name Sutton. Well, that couldn't be true because the marriage to the person who had a connection to Sutton is kind of not very straightforward and would have happened long after 1704. So that's definitely not true. So what it is, it's actually Southtown. There's lots of Suttons all over the place. And this is a note to myself to give you the reference from the book I found it in, and I didn't do that. But I will for the version I give you. All right. That is, I believe, the end of my talk about Sutton and the department. Thanks for sticking with me, everyone. That was a long talk. Do you guys have any questions?
So I got a quick question.
So hang on a second. You've been dominating. There's a guy in the back. Go ahead.
Just a quick, sorry, in that book, I think it was a second volume of Sutton history. It talked about during King Philip's War, I think it said the colonists came and burned the village, I guess, but the Indians had gone away. Did you hear anything about that? I think it mentioned 2 captains of the militia came, but the praying Indians had left.
Yes, that's correct.
So that would have been in West Sutton? Is that what would have been there?
Yeah, that is documented in there.
The praying village of Manchester.
Manchester, right. Okay, so I didn't include this in the presentation, but I'll talk about it now. In this book here that I brought along about the Nipmuc Indians, it's called The Indians of Nipmuc Country in Southern New England by Dennis Connolly. He talks about a lot of things, the settlement of Nipmuc Country, particularly, and the praying towns. The Puritans were very interested in saving souls, right? And they claim to be being very successful at it. So when the war starts, why did the Indians fight against the colonists, right? His claim is that they really weren't that successful. And there was a law passed, I think it's 1652, that essentially allowed the province of the Massachusetts Bay Colony to do whatever they wanted with land that was not being used, not being improved. So the Indians would have small house lots but large common land, which is why Wampus couldn't break it up. And to the English, they weren't improving the land. So it was a big land scheme to take the land away from the Indians. These praying villages, they wanted to bring them all into villages. Now you're not using your land, we're going to take it from you. That's what Connolly says. And what he also says is the people, Eliot and the people that were doing the preaching, were the ones that had to deliver that message to the Indians. And they had to do that right before the start of the war. So guess which side the Indians decided to go on when the war started. Thank you. Yes?
So my question was, at the same time, so you're showing Dudley, Stoughton, those people have the Mass Bay funding land in that area, especially where you're talking in the Putnam area. But you have up in Salem, the Kings and the other families plotting land that meets right up and almost, according to your map, kind of overlays that. And this, they're setting up as a settlement. North side of the road, settlers, south side of the road, proprietors. We get to keep this and sell it. How does that conflict with what's already been laid out 40, 50 years earlier? Do you know if that ever came to fruition at some point? Because they were now kind of vying for the same pieces of property, like you showed, there were 3 or 4 deeds and people selling the same piece of property.
Right. So you're asking me, how did the original settlers of Sutton break up the land?
And did it ever have to come to a head where they?
Yeah, I didn't do that research at all. I was just interested in the West Sutton part. I am curious about how Sutton was settled. I've asked around and looked for the original records that show, so I can put them on my map. I've yet to find them. So
We'll talk later.
if there are records, it'd be kind of interesting to read through. All right, thanks. Any other questions? Yes, in the back.
Where's the Michelson property?
The Michelson property is on Mendon Road, south of the Stevenson property on Mendon Road. You know where the big yellow house is, where they had all the pumpkins and stuff? You continue down south, west on Mendon Road, past that, and you will find the Michelson property. Does that sound about right? Yeah, you can see it from Sutton Turnpike when there's no leaves in the trees. And in the fall, there's a bunch of really big maple trees around the property that we used to climb. We found out you can actually do something interesting with that. Jim's been making syrup this year anyway, first time we've tried that. Any other questions? Sorry? That was part of the original land. That's where Cousin Kelly. Yeah, this day, of course. Very good. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you for your time.